Welcome back. Hi, Dr. Alan Power. We'd like to hear more about your innovative approach to dementia care.
Okay. I'd love to talk about it. You know, I worked in long-term care for many, many years, over 20 years, and was frustrated by the fact that when people were distressed living with dementia, we didn't have an answer for them. And the traditional view of dementia is that when people are distressed or are doing things we don't understand, that's a symptom of dementia, that the damaged brain is causing them to do those things. And I've never really believed that, because every once in a while I would see us come up with an approach that would solve the problem. And I thought, well, if that helped that person, how many other people are we giving medicines to that might have other solutions? So I really worked on a different approach. And what happens when you see these as symptoms of dementia is that you blame everything on the disease. And if you blame everything on the disease, of course you're going to use pills, because that's how you treat diseases. I don't believe that, and I've fought against that traditional view of behavioral symptoms of dementia all along. I believe that in almost every case, unless there's something obvious like an infection, that there's always something deeper. The dementia certainly affects how you react in a given situation. It affects how you can communicate and how you can cope with stress. But I believe there's always something deeper. And what I have found in my work is that is in a more global aspect of the person's well-being. And when I was writing in my books, I borrowed a model from one of the culture change movements called the Eden Alternative. And they had a model of well-being that they thought all humans, regardless of age or nationality or background, need to live well. And they came up with what they call 7 domains of well-being. And those domains of well-being are identity, connectedness, security, autonomy, meaning, growth, and joy. And the more I worked with those and brought them into my trainings, the more I realized that we don't learn how to support those things in people with dementia. You and I, maybe we can work on meaning in our lives, it can work on autonomy, but when you have cognitive changes, that's harder to do. You need help. And if your caregivers don't recognize that you need that, or if more importantly, they do things that actually erode those aspects of well-being, that can be a primary cause of distress. So I started saying, dementia is not the root cause. There's something deeper. And how can I come up with a way that people can look at those well-being domains and find ways to actually help refill those glasses, if you will, so people's 7 cups of domain are full again and not empty like they often are.
Exactly. So yeah, dementia, we don't only look at the behaviors. We have to look at the deep side of behavior, why it happened. Right?
Yeah, and you know, there are lots of different kinds of dementia. There are lots of different changes in different people's brains. And it's so confusing that to just teach those things to care partners is overwhelming. And I needed something simpler. And when I started writing my first book, I decided I have to come up with something to take my mind out of a narrow medical view. How can I look at dementia in a way that really captures that individual experience?
Exactly.
And so the first thing I did was I rewrote a definition of dementia to simply say dementia is a shift in the way people experience the world around them. And when I did that, it opened my eyes to a lot of things I hadn't seen, because I'm not just blaming it on broken brain cells. I'm not focusing on stages or types of dementia. I'm just saying each individual is experiencing the world differently. How can I try to understand their experience, their perspective? And just like with a physical disability, how can I create accommodations so that they can continue to be as successful as possible in spite of their cognitive disability?
So they are still growing as a human being, right?
Absolutely. People grow until the day they die. And once again, I think people with dementia can't learn. That's not true. And they think people with dementia can't grow, and that is also not true. I've seen people even with what would be termed advanced dementia who experience personal growth, who experience meaning, who experience significance in their lives, if they're given the opportunity to do so. The problem is that we don't see it and we don't provide it. And then when people don't improve or don't live well, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We didn't give them the opportunity, and then what we see is what we expected, less and less.
Yes, so we just have to open our eyes.
We do.
We cannot change them, but we can change our view, right?
Yeah. And our eyes include our ears, our mindset, our attitudes, our language, and just our presence when we're in the presence of a person who is living with dementia to really try to understand them as best we can in a way that's not just medically oriented, but as a human being.
Yes. So first we try to understand, then we improve our communication skills, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Communication skills are a huge part of what I teach because an interaction with a person can be made or broken by good or not so good communication skills.
So what is your specifically, what's your communication strategies when you?
There are many things, but just to give a few basics, one thing I always ask people to do is to try to sit down or get down to the eye level of the person. I think busy care professionals often don't want to sit down, but I think there are 3 reasons to sit down. First of all, this kind of eye contact, seeing the face, seeing the mouth move, it improves communication. The second one is that there's a dynamic, a power dynamic when you stand over somebody. And people already have too many choices taken away from them. Autonomy is threatened in people with dementia early on. So when you stand over people, there's that dominance that can make people more defensive, more resistive. And the third reason to sit down is there's an unspoken message that I have time for you. That I'm not running out the door. And so just taking a moment or so to connect with somebody before you start a task can be extremely important. There are many other things, but I'll just mention 2. One of them is just being present, being totally mindful and not thinking about where you're going next, but really being focused, because the person can sense your attention or your inattention, and being aware of your body language, which is people with dementia are very keen on understanding body language. And if we're not careful, our body language may not reflect what we want it to, and we may give the wrong message. The last thing I talk about is, I call it speaking like a sports interviewer. Sports interviewers often seem funny to me because they never seem to ask questions. They only make statements. So they say, well, coach, your team made a rally there in the 3rd period, but you came up short, and hold the mic out. And I always thought, that's funny, he didn't ask him anything. But when you ask questions, people have to give answers, which can be right or wrong. And I find it's helpful when people are struggling to answer your questions to turn them into statements. So instead of saying, what did you have for dinner last night, which requires memory, you can say, I heard they had lasagna for dinner last night. That must have been good. And then the person can say whatever they want because they don't have to be right or wrong. They can say, yes, I had lasagna. They can say, no, I had chicken. They can say, I like lasagna. They can say, we used to make sauce at our house on Sundays. They can say whatever they want. And that's an enabler of conversation and engagement instead of asking things that shut people down because they challenge them to come up with facts. There are many other things, but those are some big ones.
So giving them an opportunity to express themselves.
In a way that's not right or wrong, to use their own opinions and their own creativity to just continue the conversation without it being corrected.
Yes, I think it's a new approach, and everybody, we have to learn to do it, right?
Yeah,
it's
and
great.
there are some people, as we know, people engaged with the arts who do wonderful things like this, who use creativity, use improv skills to enable dialogue and creativity and storytelling in people who can't remember many important things.
Yeah, I heard good things about it. It's a great approach. I agree, yeah.
To find out what they need, what kind of research would help them live better. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to study this approach to dementia. And as I mentioned, we have one village in Windsor through Schlegel Villages who is working on this approach. And the approach is different in that most approaches, whether they're either drugs or non-pharmacological approaches, they always assume that the dementia is causing the person's distress, and they're just reacting to try to mitigate and calm the person. But that doesn't really do anything to change the situation. So with this well-being approach, what I'm saying is if well-being is the root cause and people don't have enough, let's identify which of those well-being domains is not well satisfied, and let's work proactively 24/7 to try to fill those glasses for the person so they never get to that point where they are at a crisis point. What you're doing is you're not curing dementia, but you're building resilience and reserve. So I've started this project with the team out at Aspen Lake, and they're already having great results. And I can just tell a very quick story that shows how one of those domains can be brought to bear. I heard a story about a person who was constantly trying to leave the living area, and they didn't want her to go because they worry about her going outside by herself, of course, getting lost, whatever. But the door was causing distress because she kept trying to get out that door. And so the evening nurse, after the training, was working with her, and she said she needs something meaningful in her life. It's evening. She needs to be occupied in a way that's meaningful. And since she was doing evening rounds, she would invite the woman to come do rounds with her.
Wow, that's a great approach.
And she would talk to her, she would engage her. She might even take a glass of water to somebody's room to help so they can take their evening pills. She was evening occasionally, if people wanted to, she'd say a bedtime prayer with them. And she stopped trying to leave. That just took care of the problem because she was missing meaning in her life. That was the domain that was really being eroded. And she was looking for something meaningful, and it wasn't happening where she was living, so she was trying to get out. Once it was happening, she didn't feel the need to leave anymore. So that's just a simple example, but that is, it shows the possibility that can happen. And once again, this is the kind of person that would get a drug, for what they would call exit-seeking behavior. And she didn't need a drug, she needed some meaning in her life.
Yeah.
Of action, I think, is, it kind of goes with the title of my second book, Dementia Beyond Disease, and that is to look beyond the disease, to see the person, and not just the label of dementia. And don't let the label only let you see what's wrong with the person. Don't fall into the stigmas around dementia. To see that person as a person you might see with any other person with a different ability. One of my greatest teachers was the late Dr. Richard Taylor, who was a psychologist who lived with Alzheimer's for 15 years. And he traveled the world, he wrote books, he talked about dementia from his aspect. And we made some books, we made some videos together and gave talks together and traveled a lot. And first time I saw him speak, he said, "I am not dying of a fatal disease. I am living with a chronic disability." And that's a big shift from dying to living, from fatal disease to chronic disability. And I'm not saying that there is no disease, but when you look at dementia through the lens of a cognitive disability, then you start saying, just like you give a wheelchair to, or give a ramp to somebody with a wheelchair, how can I give some sort of a ramp to someone whose brain is changing, not a physical ramp, but accommodations for their changing brain so that they can continue to relate and engage successfully with the world. And once we just start seeing this as a normal, fully formed human adult who's developing a disability, then our eyes are open to a lot of possibilities.
Yes, they do.
Well, my vision is that we can help people to learn a new way to see people with dementia, that we can fight the stigmas that are out there, that we can not dismiss the medical aspects of dementia, but put them in perspective to the larger care of the whole person. But we also need more than just education. And the other part of my education that's fairly unique is because I've been involved with the culture change movement, it's not just education. You need to transform the organizational processes, because if you have a rigid institutional organization and you want people to think differently, they can't think differently unless we change systems so that they can think and act differently. So part of it is organizational transformation. Part of it is transforming physical design. Another RIA project I did a few years ago was to come up with a design guide so that people could walk around the area where they care for people, either in retirement or long-term care, and see what aspects of the physical environment were good or bad for people with dementia, to understand how they could improve the physical environment. So it's really about all those three things, the philosophy, the operations, and the physical environment. And they're like a three-legged stool. Education's great, but without the other two parts, you can never fully realize this. So I'm hoping that this will help spearhead, many people who are doing things similar to me to help encourage changes in the way we support people. And this applies to people at home too, not just in long-term care or institutional living. It can be wherever people live or engage.
Yeah, I agree with you. We need to have a systematic approach, right? It's not.
Yes.
We all have to work together to make it happen. Right?
It's very much about collaboration, about dialogue, as my colleague, co-author, Dr. Jennifer Carson says. It's about dialogue. It's about bringing diverse stakeholders together to solve issues together.
Great. So where people can find more about your information?
Well, there's a bio of me on the RIA website, and that is www.the-ria.ca. And I also have a website which is alpower.net. ALPOWER.net, and there's more information there about the work I do and the music too.
Yes, we like to listen to your music, and
Thank you.
And some of your music is so beautiful.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I recommend people read your books as well, right? They're just so well written.
I tried to write them for a general audience, not for doctors, because I want them to be read by the public at large, because that's where change will occur.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Angela. It's
so
a pleasure
great to
to
have
be here.
you. Okay, may you're all forever young. Thank you for joining us, audience. Okay.